I saw that you saw yesterday.
It's a really shitty movie.
Do you like Danny Boyle?
He's fine, I guess. He's not really much of an auteur. Like Sunshine, Train Spotting, 28 Days Later, Shallow Grey, like these movies are good. He's like a journeyman kind of. And Yesterday is definitely the worst movie I've ever seen by him. It's like a supremely lazy, terribly made movie. Fucking sucks. How would you even describe a Danny Boyle movie?
I mean, when I think of a Danny Boyle movie, I only think of Trainspotting. I've seen his other work, but that's the only one that I can think of that has any sort of look to it. And he's competent. I don't think he's a bad director by any means, which is probably why they put him on something like Yesterday, because Yesterday definitely feels like a film that wasn't made by a human being, but rather a film that was made by a corporation. And I haven't thought about it once since it came out in 2019.
It has such a cynical, evil way of looking at art. This idea that Beatles music is imbued with this special energy that in 2019, in which everyone recognizes that these are great songs and he becomes famous, it's just so stupid. And like evoking like John Lennon at the end too is just pathetic.
The whole reason the Beatles were famous was because they were at a very specific moment in time and they were doing a very specific thing. And just transport that music to now.
It wouldn't do anything. It also posits the future in which, so the Beatles don't exist. They never existed in this world. And they're like, Oasis doesn't exist because without the Beatles, you don't have Oasis. And like, okay, that makes sense, I guess. But there are other bands that are brought up and discussed that also wouldn't exist without the Beatles, like Ed Sheeran, who's terrible. I'm gonna say that Ed Sheeran's music career in general wouldn't exist without the Beatles, and yet he exists in a world where the Beatles don't exist. In the movie, he has a like Killers poster. I would posit that the Killers would not exist without the Beatles. I don't think Radiohead would exist without the Beatles. It doesn't make any sense.
I do sort of like this premise of what if we lived in a world where this specific thing didn't exist? But then like follow that through line, like actually play through history. Like what happens?
You can't just do one thing. It's either all or nothing.
Exactly. I mean, Watchmen does this, the idea that what if we won the Vietnam War and everything is sort of built off that.
That's more interesting.
It's a much bigger event than, of course, like the Beatles not existing.
The Philip K. Dick book, The Man in the High Castle, is the idea that, like, what if the Nazis won World War II? That's done in a very good way.
Well, even if the Beatles don't exist, you still have the Rolling Stones, the Monkees, bands that were in that same category, right? Doing similar things. I mean, it's kind of like when people posit the idea of, well, if Hitler didn't exist, then Nazi Germany wouldn't exist. It's like, well, no, there were a lot of factors involved that it wasn't just, right? It's not like just the Beatles. Like there was a lot of other people
Yeah,
involved in the process of making music during the 1960s. And if the Beatles didn't existed, right, there would
that's a
have
good
been
point, too.
sounds that would have been very similar that would have basically taken the place.
You're right about that. Yeah.
It's almost like a historical vacuum, right? Like if you took someone out of history, like someone else would just take his place.
In the same way, you could probably argue, too, that instead of Radiohead, instead of Oasis, instead of the Killers, it would be like other bands that sound this or that way.